Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, Governor Boggs was one of the worst governors in Missouri history, and I was surprised to find out that he started a honey war. So, archaeologist Paul Debarthe from the Community of Christ is going to talk a little bit more about that. We'll also talk about abolitionism and a person you may not have heard of, but is very important in 19th century history, and that is the murder of Elijah Lovejoy. So we'll also talk about the Mansion House. Was it a station on the Underground Railroad? Paul thinks so. So check out our conversation. Fantastic. All right. So the weird thing is, I knew about your archaeological stuff in Nauvoo, and then all of a sudden you have this new book on Haun's Mill. So as we jump into Haun's Mill, and of course you're the archaeologist, can you give people that may not have watched some of my previous interviews and don't know what's Haun's Mill Massacre, what is that all about?
Well, notice the way you said that, Haun's Mill Massacre, what
I
that's
said
all
that
about.
on purpose.
And for Mormons, it's a Haun's Mill Massacre. For Missourians, it is not likely to be found in their history books.
They call it an incident, right?
Well, that came from my students.
Okay.
Because my students have been digging in Caldwell County and digging at Haun's Mill, and we got an invitation to give a presentation to the Caldwell County Historical Society meeting in Polo. And on the way to that presentation, the question came up. Here we're digging on what the Mormons call the Haun's Mill Massacre site, but we're presenting to the Caldwell County Historical Society, which had a bunch of people that were on the attacking group in it. How do we address this matter and not be offensive? And I left it in the hands of the students, and they presented that night on the Haun's Mill incident in the Mormon War. And I've been proud of that ever since, because it is a more neutral way to approach it. And yeah, there were 17 people killed, dumped in a well. The small hamlet of Haun's Mill was very innocently hit because Jacob Hahn was not a Mormon, but his mill was there on Shoal Creek supplying wood for the Mormons to build houses as they came into Caldwell County. And he had the grist mill to grind the grain, and he was in a very good position to take advantage of the Mormons coming into that county because it was part of the settlement that had been brokered by Alexander Donovan.
Right.
And so, yeah, the Haun's Mill incident was particularly painful because it was so unnecessary. You have a group of people from Kirtland who left at the beginning of the Mormon War, early July, and made their trek all the way across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri, months to get there finally in October to be killed in the massacre, in the incident. And to me, one of the fascinating things that comes out in the book is the discovery that in 1838 in Indiana, the Potawatomi village of some 850 people was burned by the federal government to get them out of there. They were then escorted by the military across those same states. They happened to camp in some of the same spots that the Mormons had camped in when they were on the way from Kirtland to Haun's Mill. But they came the southern route to Independence and would have been in Independence at the time that the incident at Haun's Mill occurred. But they were expecting to go across into Kansas where the government had promised them new houses. Instead, they found a cemetery, and Kansas named a county for them. But they left behind a trail of about 100 dead people. And if you drive along Highway 24 through Missouri, you'll find occasional monuments to mark where those children are buried. And so the harshness of what was going on in this slave state of Missouri at the time, under the governance of Lilburn Boggs, it's just remarkable. In part because it was a slave state and the slave owner politics was not particularly considered of the value of human life other than the white people, the people that owned slaves. People that didn't own slaves that were white generally supported the Slave Act and supported that politics. But it was a pretty harsh day. The harsh day, I found out more recently, even after the book went to press, that Mr. Boggs Governor Boggs,
Yeah.
was also the instigator of the Honey War, which happens to have covered the territory where my farm is in Iowa.
Oh, really?
Part of the fun of the historical research.
Huh.
6 honey trees up there, and Governor Boggs sent the sheriff up to gather the $6 worth of taxes, and the sheriff came back and said, those people think they're in Iowa, they're not going to pay taxes in Missouri. And Governor Boggs sent him back, you make sure you get that money collected.
Uh-oh.
And he disappeared for a while, and we don't know for sure whether he was enticed by some comforting lady or just what happened. But anyway, Governor Boggs issued the order to send the militia up and make sure they got those taxes collected. Sent 1,500 men to
Was this before or after Huntsville?
This is after 1839.
Oh, I have not heard this story. Wow.
To me, it's pretty good fun because, you see, the division between Iowa and Missouri was initially set up at the Des Moines Rapids and then following the latitude directly west across. But the Des Moines Rapids is 12 miles long. And so the Missourians said it's at Montrose. And the Iowans said it's Keokuk.
Oh.
And so here's a 12-mile gap where the people in between became known as Hairy Nation, because these were hairy, scruffy people who didn't want to pay taxes to either state.
So Boggs was still governor, so this is around 1840 or so?
Yeah, he was governor from 1836 to 1840.
Okay.
And so here he sends 1,500 guys up to collect the taxes on 6 honey trees. And Governor Lucas of the territory of Iowa gathered up 1,200 guys to defend Iowa.
Oh, my goodness.
And they didn't have guns, and so they brought their pitchforks and broom handles, and they proceeded to defend their state.
Wow.
Defend their rights to not have to pay taxes. One of the interesting comments came out there of one of the Iowa guys saying, our land is in Iowa. We don't want it in Missouri because their land isn't as good. Let me finish that one just a little bit. The end of the story is particularly fun because by December of 1839, it began to turn cold. The Missourians had gotten, I think, 5 wagon loads of whiskey, and so they had a pretty good party. And they ended up shooting a deer, cutting it in half, and putting Governor Lucas' name on one and Governor Boggs on the other. And they shot them as target for target practice until they turned them into mincemeat.
Oh,
then they buried the collections and gave them a military ceremony to bury both of them. And
Wow.
the Iowans, of course, were tired of being cold and they didn't have adequate equipment or housing, and so mostly they just sort of peeled off in the night and went home. But they did agree that they should allow the federal surveyor to come and put the line in, and he did, and that's the line that's there today. And that line puts my farm 3 miles north of the Missouri-Iowa border. So my farm, you see, is in part of that honey war zone.
That's crazy.
Isn't that fun?
I mean, so I have to ask you this because I had Alex Baugh on my podcast talking about Huntsville, and he called Governor Boggs the worst governor in the history of Missouri. Would you agree with that?
One of the worst in the history of the country.
Okay, you go even further.
Well, he was on hand in 33 when the Jackson County riots broke out.
Yeah, because he's from Independence.
Yeah, right. He's from Independence. His home was right there close to where the printing office was. And so, yeah, he was apparently on hand and saw it, witnessed, and was part of it. And so that was 33. So by 36, he becomes governor, and he clearly is in the pockets of the slave owners. And 6 honey trees, the northern part of the state, not paying taxes. Look at all the wasted money to go after that.
And that's so weird to me because, he issued the famous extermination order, which was, I think, the day before the
3 days before.
3 days before.
27th of October, and then the massacre incident occurred on the 30th.
Yeah, and
so it's unlikely. It's most unlikely that the regulars knew about his order.
Right.
That is to say that they may very well have had some premonition of it. They may have had some background dealing to try to advocate for it, but they would not have had fulfillment of it. And furthermore, the idea of exterminating people would authorize the right to kill. And we don't see that following Huntsville. They had opportunity, but they basically were driving them out of the state. They were not trying to kill a bunch of people.
Right. And that's basically what Alex said, too, was we need to get them out of the state. And he said that he thinks that if word had come down in time, it may have prevented the Hauntsville massacre. Have you heard that before?
If word had not come down?
If word had come down. If the Missouri troops had heard about the massacre or the extermination order, the massacre might never have happened because they were like, get out of here.
Yeah, it is clearly a possibility. I recognize, though, there was a good deal of hostility because while we talk about the religious differences, the fact that the Mormons were coming into a slave state and saying we want to build Zion here with everybody equal, and blacks and First Nations people can participate, we'll baptize them, and that was very much contrary to what the slave state ideology was. The early Constitution of Missouri made it so blacks were automatically slaves unless they carried their certificate to show otherwise.
Oh, that's interesting.
So when Elijah Lovejoy in St. Louis, I forgot his name, the black man who was free, get lynched, burned at the stake because he didn't have his certificate with him. Elijah Lovejoy got upset and wrote some very poignant words on his press to chastise the Missourians for being so inhuman. And so they burned his press and destroyed it. So,
what year was that approximately? Do you know off the top of your head?
1836.
Oh, so this is right in the time of the hostilities with the Mormons.
Right. So, and then he got another press, and the case went to trial, and Judge Lovelace was the judge over that trial. Lawless. Judge Lawless. What a fun name for a person to be in charge of such a trial. But he ruled that under mob action, people lose their personal sense of responsibility, and so no individual is responsible for murdering the black man. Oh. And Elijah Lovejoy wrote about that, so they destroyed his press again.
And Elijah Lovejoy is just was he an abolitionist, would we say?
He was an abolitionist.
Non-Mormon.
Not a Mormon, no.
Just very strongly against slavery.
There's more to this story, though, if I go back just a bit, because the Smith family had gotten started in Palmyra,
right? And
several of them, Lucy and Hiram, Sophronia, and Samuel, I believe it was, all joined the Presbyterian Church. And the pastor of that Presbyterian Church had gone to Quincy, Illinois, I believe in the 20s, well, must have been close to 1830, and helped to establish the Lord's Barn, which was a Presbyterian congregational, I believe, combination with two pastors that were abolitionists on the Underground Railroad, and they got Adams County to be the most abolitionist county of Illinois at that time, and so here they were helping blacks to get out of Missouri, getting them under the wagons and hiding them and getting them up on the Underground Railroad on the way to Canada. And then here came these Mormons out of Independence, out of Missouri, that Governor Boggs was exterminating in 1838, and they didn't have to be hidden. And 1,000 people in Quincy, in Adams County, housed 3,000 Mormons for about 3 months until they moved on to Nauvoo. And interestingly enough, I have archaeological evidence to show that they were very much influenced by the abolitionist process there. We found a hiding place on the mansion house that we're not supposed to be talking about yet.
Oh. We got a scoop here. All right, that's awesome.
Well, but anyway, I'm trying to get ahead of my story because Elijah Lovejoy had gone across to Alton, Illinois, after his press had been destroyed, I think, 3 times in Missouri. He went across to Alton and got another press, and the slave owners came after him, destroyed his press, and shot him 5 times and killed him.
Yeah.
His brother, Owen Lovejoy, then picked up the abolitionist baton. He married a lady who had about 1,000 acres halfway between Nauvoo and Chicago, and that became one of the major Underground Railroad staging points to get people to Canada. When Owen Lovejoy then came to Nauvoo in 1838, I believe it was, with his daughter and her husband, Joseph III gave them a tour of Nauvoo. And Joseph III had already knew about Elijah Lovejoy being martyred for the abolitionist cause, was already profoundly influenced by that. And the privilege of giving a tour to Owen Lovejoy was an honor that he put in his memoir. And clearly he was profoundly influenced for the rest of his life. In his section 116 in the Doctrine and Covenants, he honored the black people by indicating that they should also be ordained, especially to serve their own people.
Wow, that's interesting.
And wow, there's just so much of an abolitionist thread through there that I've got an article that's just been rejected about that. Now I have to rewrite it to get it. We can talk about that another time. But there's a profound theme of abolitionists there. William Smith, Joseph's younger brother,
right,
tied up with Isaac Sheen down in Kentucky and Ohio. Isaac Sheen had personally escorted a black man, a slave, from Maryland all the way to Canada to help him get his freedom. And then in his newspaper in Covington, he for 6 years published the request for some black woman to marry him so that they could appeal against these stupid laws that were forbidding it. No black woman ever volunteered for that, so he ended up marrying the Babbitt girl, but here we're talking here about people. Well, and William was tied in with him. They got a number of the Hale family members involved in the Underground Railroad at Palestine Grove, which was William's headquarters. I believe it's the Richardson family had a trapdoor in their living room with a big rug over it. So when the sheriff came and the escaping slaves were underneath the trapdoor, the sheriff didn't find them. But here were people that were tied directly to Isaac Sheen and William Smith, helping to transport people through Palestine Grove up to Canada.
Wow, I didn't know that story.
And apparently the Hale family had people all the way that could help to shepherd those people.
Well, and I know Emma Hale's aunt married a black man. Mark Staker told me that, and I was like, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so to appreciate that family already had some clear abolitionist tendencies.
Right.
And, well, what I found at the Mansion House in the excavations there, that we found a big drain. We also found the drains outside, but most drains come off the roof, and they carry them from the high ground down to low ground and get the water away from the house. Mm-hmm. This drain on the southeast corner of the Mansion Hotel was a vaulted drain, more than 3 feet high, about a little over 2 feet wide, lined with brick. And we only dug 10 feet of it, but it was angling from the southeast corner of the Mansion Hotel toward Water Street. And that was enough to hide 3 or 4 men.
Oh, really?
And it was too high to drain the basement. So why did they do it?
Yeah.
I think there's clear evidence of the Underground Railroad.
So are you saying that the Mansion House was part of the Underground Railroad?
I'm saying that. Yeah, I haven't got that published yet, but...
Holy cow!
Yes, I can show you the pictures of the excavation that demonstrate this hiding place.
I love these tangents because we came here to talk about Huntsville, now we're talking about Underground Railroad. Holy cow, that's awesome. I've never heard that before.
Well, it's because it's secret. Nobody who was involved... I have a lady who was an informant here in Kansas City who grew up in a house along the Missouri River that was here when the slaves were here. And the house had a tunnel all the way down to the river so that the slaves could be taken to the river, get them across the river to Kansas, which was free territory, and then they'd go up to Iowa and on up to Canada. They also had a pigeon coop in the house. And she, as a little girl, was told, we don't talk about this. And she asked me not to use her name. Hmm. But she was...
Well, you know who she is.
But yeah, I've had a long-term relationship with her. She's just a delightful person, perfectly honest. But here's a very strict prohibition from people. But after all, the 1793 Fugitive Slave Act,
Right.
put a $500 fine against people who helped slaves escape. And that then expanded into $1,000, what was it, 1850? And so it became a serious matter of jeopardy if somebody turned you in for helping slaves escape.
Right.
And it's interesting that we have these little bits of conflict about Joseph Smith because he initially was clearly advocating for freedom for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the time he's running for president, we have these highly questionable statements that make it look like he's supporting slavery. And in Missouri, he has some statements that make it look like he's supporting slavery. He wanted to provide them a place to go in Africa, maybe. But then he calls on Copeland, who has slaves, to be his vice president.
Oh, that's right.
And
before Sidney Rigdon.
Before Sidney Rigdon, right.
Yeah.
And so here's this fascinating history for the political face versus the religious face of Joseph Smith. But it's interesting that he was far more interested in the equality, I think, whereas Brigham Young then put the ban against blacks having the priesthood, and that lasted until 1978.
Uh-huh.
Whereas under Joseph Smith III, in 1865, he authorized people should have the priesthood for their own race.
That's fascinating. Well, I'm glad that we have an archaeologist here correcting all of our history. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with archaeologist Paul Debarthe, author of Hans Mills' Hamlet. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about the Hans Mills Massacre. Is there another name for this term? Battle is a more neutral term. So when you talk to these students in Missouri that want to call it the Hans Mill incident, is that a way of kind of whitewashing what happened there at Hans Mill?
Yeah. But at the same time, there's still a lot of tension.
Right. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.